Welcome to the Rethinking Humanity podcast, where we dive deeper into what makes us human and what causes us to thrive. I'm Lacey Delane.
I'm Sonya, Larrea.
And we are so excited to have you guys for episode 33. It is our need for identity. And as you can tell, I am joining you not from Atlanta. Yes.
Where are you at, Lacey?
I am at the beach right now, and that's why my hair is a little bit wet. That's why it looks like there's a beach picture in the background. I am enjoying the sand and the sun.
Good. Because in Atlanta here, it's raining. We got storms, but I'm glad you're at the beach.
Oh, there's storms there?
Yeah, there are. I mean, it depends on what area you're in, but it was raining pretty bad here. Now it's slowed down, so yeah.
I escaped the storms just in time.
Yes, you did.
Well, we are glad to have you guys. We missed you last week. It was July 4th weekend. Sonya and I both have been really, really busy, but we definitely took the week to take a breather from the podcast. So we missed you last week, but we're glad to be back. We've had a lot going on, but we're really, really excited. Sonya, we haven't talked a lot in the last couple weeks, but
no.
Since our last episode. But one thing that's happened since I saw you, I wanted to share with you and with the audience, is I actually changed my diet. I went back to a vegan diet.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How's that working out?
It's going great. I feel really, really good. Like really, really good. More energy, more clear-headed, just more calm, more, it's easier for me to accept things, I think, that radical acceptance thing that maybe you and I have talked about before, I think is a little bit easier. And I really do think like what we put in our bodies does affect all of our body, our mind, our emotions, everything. And so I do think it makes a difference.
Well, on that note, I am still eating sugar.
That's okay.
No, yeah, because I have a sweet tooth. I try to be good and have like dark chocolate and stuff, but
there you go.
It's tough.
That's a good substitute. Yeah. Well, we hope you all had a good 4th of July. I know there's a couple articles that I've shared with Sonya lately, and the last time we were with you, we said we were going to talk with you about motherhood and the Oedipus complex. And we're not going to do that today, but we will do that very soon, likely the next episode. We've both just been too busy to really dive into that, and we want to do it justice. So we're going to hold off. But yeah, Sonya, anything you want to mention before we get into our topic, which is our human need for identity?
No, I'm excited about getting into the topic.
Cool. Well, we have been in this series talking about our human needs and our human nature. And today we are going to talk about the need for identity. And I think we mentioned it a little bit in our last podcast when we were talking about our need for rootedness. And Sonya, we mentioned it kind of towards the end. But what are some of the things that kind of jumped out at you about this section, Sonya?
Well, the main thing that jumps out at me is that man cannot remain sane if he doesn't have a way of satisfying this need for identity and rootedness. That is huge. The fact that is something, that is needed. We can't remain sane. That's a huge statement. That also jumped out at me is how when the child is born, initially there is no I. That develops much later. The child doesn't understand the I. The infant, is still one with the mother. So that's an interesting concept of how you come into the world and how then the I has to develop.
I really like that point because I think it's easy for folks who haven't spent a lot of time around infants or kids or haven't ever had a kid to overlook that fact. It's very true. An infant develops, Fromm says, that sense of I, the ability to say I. It's one of the last things that develop for a baby and for a child, really for an infant. And so that is quite interesting. And it is true how dependent upon the mother the infant is. And so there's this not autonomy, but this codependence. Codependence might not even be the word, but definitely dependence. And at some point, as the infant begins to learn that there are things outside of himself or herself, then he begins to realize, oh, I am outside of, not just things around me, but me. I'm separate too. And that's where that sense of I comes from. And so I think it's quite interesting that he says, if we don't have a sense of I, we will go insane.
Right. I like what he says, that only after he has conceived of the outer world as being separate and different from himself does he come to the awareness of himself as a distinct being. And one of the last words he learns to use is I in reference to himself. Why I think that's really powerful is obviously a lot of people in therapy, because of this issues when they're developing the I and the attachment, or the not being able to, the not being able to detach, or the excess attachment. There's a lot here.
No, that's true. It reminds me of the episode we did on narcissism, where we talked about primary narcissism and how important that is, that stage of being an infant. And really, what was it? I think up until like age 6 or 7, it's really hard for kids to understand that other people have needs. And so for that time, it's very important actually for kids to be narcissistic, for lack of a better way to say it. And without that time, they're likely to be an unhealthy on the scale of narcissism as an adult, which is damaging to, the individuals around that person. So it's not something that we want. So it's like, hey, let's get all the narcissism out like we're supposed to at the beginning and not save it for later,
Oh, yeah. I also thought this was really powerful in reading how people will even forgo their physical survival to identify, he gets into identifying like with a group, because we start out with the clan, the primitive clan. And then that's really interesting how, if you look back in history, he gives the example of like the feudal system, being a peasant or being a feudal lord. I thought that was quite interesting. It's not that the way he describes it, it's not it's who you are. It's not like this separateness, that they embody that person, that feudal lord or that peasant. So if you take that away, if you say you're not a peasant anymore, well, then the question becomes, well, who am I? I mean, that's an interesting, that's not, I think, something in the modern day world that we deal with. So it's a whole different way of thinking,
Like from To Have or To Be, when Fromm says, if I am what I have and I lose what I have, then what am I? Right? It's a similar kind of thing. And he says in here, like peasants or lords, that wasn't like a description of them. That was who they were.
Right.
So really different than, where we are today as far as classes are concerned. They're a lot more fluid now. In some ways they are, but then in some ways, I don't know, I might argue that they aren't.
Right. The question was really good, where he puts, the person's going to say, how do I know that I am I? How do I know that I am I? And
so, that taps into the insanity part. How do I know that I am I? If you can't know that you are you, you're definitely going to have a hard time being a stable individual, I would imagine.
Right. And it makes, for me personally, I'm more empathetic when I look back at history and I you see like a documentary, or you see a movie or read, you kind of question, like, how could these people be in these roles? But when you realize that that's what defined, that's who they were. It wasn't separate for them. That's just who they were.
Right.
So it makes you realize it's a different way of thinking.
And it's also, I think one of the points he's making here is like, that's one way to find your identity is in this herd conformity, idea, this idea that my identity is in the group, in the herd. And then there's the identity of finding your identity within yourself as an individual, and then finding yourself as a part of that group in a healthy way. So obviously that the second one is what he's advocating for, what I would advocate for.
Right. He talks about how you go into Western culture and then you're starting to have the experience of the individuality, where
Mm-hmm.
we're, having the individual thinking freely, like politically, economically, by teaching the individual to think for him or herself. But of course, like you
Yes.
were saying, then we get into the part, there's still this identity issue where you say, I am this religion or I am this occupation. So there's
Right.
this need to identify with something beyond just yourself as an individual. That's how I see it. That there's
Yeah.
this need for the individual to attach to, like you're saying, a herd, a group.
Yes. Yes. He says many substitutes for a truly individual sense of identity were sought for and found. Nation, religion, class, and occupation serve to furnish a sense of identity. I would argue that we in this culture, American culture now in 2021, we largely find our sense of identity in our work. Because what is the first thing that people ask each other when they meet each other?
Yeah.
What do you do?
What do you do?
What do you
Yeah.
do? Right?
Right.
So I am a teacher. I am a whatever you are. So yeah, I think we're definitely we're one of the folks that do that, or one of the cultures that do that for sure.
Yeah, what's interesting too is our culture. I think we do have this need to identify with something, some group. But I find what's fascinating now is how we see the danger of actually attaching ourselves to some institution or group, because then the group thinking takes over the individual. If it clashes with one's belief, then the individual says, well, I want to be part of this group. So I have to accept that their beliefs. And that's a real dangerous place to be. Even though I understand there's that part of you that wants to have the support or be with your, people. It's a dangerous place though, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when we start talking about religious groups and, unfortunately this institutional, what we've talked about on the podcast, or sexual abuse that we've seen for decades now, and it just happens over and over again. And so the power that's given as a result of that mindset can be very, very, very dangerous.
Yeah, it's the conformity. People want to conform and they want to belong. It's the belonging. And then we run into this problem, like you said, of the institutions. And I think there's a tendency to kind of look the other way, like, oh, there's might be a few bad things going on there, but as a whole, we're a really good group here, so we're not going to look at this. And that's
no,
you get into trouble. Yeah,
and I laugh. I'm sorry, I laugh.
No, that's okay.
That's the sweet spot, though. Like when you go, yeah, we have a couple things wrong. When you can say, yeah, we have a couple things wrong. Let's think about those. That's where we can make the growth, and like what I'm saying, sweet spot. Good things can come out of it, because nobody's perfect, right? And no group can be perfect as a result. But the issue is when we just overlook, blind spots and areas where areas where we know that we can see improvement in ourselves.
Yeah, and I think what Fromm says, at least that struck me, that resonates with me, says the need to feel a sense of identity stems from the very condition of human existence, and it is the source of the most intense strivings. Since I cannot remain sane without the sense of I am driven to do almost anything to acquire this sense.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that, because what I think happens is it's almost like a death. So someone says, well, if I go against the group, then who am I? And I'm alone. So this is something that is like from Fromm, what Fromm is saying is, it's the source of one of the most intense strivings of being a human.
Yeah.
That we need to identify with our quote unquote group, clan. But then the question then becomes is who or what are we identifying with?
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing this makes me think about is how important it is for an individual to have a sense of I, to have a description of what I is for themselves. What does that actually mean? And being settled in that, because without that, there's going to be a lot of insecurity and instability.
Yeah. It was interesting what you said earlier about how it is in the States. I'm not sure how we would define it in other countries. I don't know that work, it's placed, on the same level as we do here. But I think an interesting experiment would be meeting people, not knowing anything like what they do, that sort of thing, just interacting, having conversations, they read, or maybe they do some sport, or you just know them as a human being, and then finding out later what they do, instead of having that preconceived notion, oh, you're a teacher, oh, you're a CEO, oh, you work in house cleaning. We already create in our mind who this individual is, and we don't really know everything about that person, or just it's a very limited part of them.
One thing I challenge myself to do is not ask that question whenever I meet new people. I'm like, I'm not even going to ask the question, because you know what? It doesn't determine the person's value at all. The person is valuable because they're a person, they're in front of me. Plus, I'm more interested in what do they enjoy?
Yeah.
What are they passionate about?
So I'll tell you something that I've noticed people do. And I know people don't mean to perhaps do this, but it's not right. I'll give you an example. So you understand that if you're an American, you're born here, and you could have your ancestors could be from wherever, they could be from another country. But as an American, you're here. A lot of people tend to, if you look differently, if one looks differently, whether it's the color of their skin or some feature about them, a lot of people say, well, where are you from? Right. And then the person that will say, well, I'm from here. I'm from the States. No. But like, where are you from?
Right.
And to me, that's incorrect, because they're from here. So the question, though, what the person wants to know is like, where's your descendants from? But if you think about it, it's kind of not appropriate in that if you're born here, you're American,
That would be a really weird question for me if I was born here and somebody asked me multiple times, where are you from? Well, I already told you where I'm from. I'm here, I'm from here. Just because I don't look like I'm from here doesn't mean I'm not from here. On that note, actually, I know we didn't discuss anything, Sonya, about like what we've been reading this week and ideas and different things in the news. But there's a book that I've been listening to actually through the Fulton County Library app. It's called Dreams from Many Rivers, I believe is the title, but it's a Latin American history. It's a book on Latin American history, and it's so super interesting. And it's actually just a collection of poems of people talking about their experience throughout history of being a Latin American in the U.S. And a lot of it is like a lot of discrimination stories about I speak Spanish, or I have a Latin American last name, and people don't regard me actually truly as an American. And I'm like, wow,
that's exactly what I'm saying. A person could speak perfect English. They could have been here for many years and born here, but their ancestors or, great grandparents are from somewhere else. And other individual immediately, there's like that discrimination. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. And so again, it goes to the identity. It's how we need to put these people in boxes. We need to do this, identify them a certain way. And I think, Fromm just brings up the need that we all have to also have an identity, but we have to really be careful how we decide to define that. And we already know that. We could see that through our politics, through status, economics. There's so many areas that we tend to all of a sudden do the judgment, decide, who belongs where, and that's you have to be careful.
I love what you're saying about how quickly we label. Like it seems like a need, like this unconscious need we have when we are around someone new. It's like, how do I put you in a box? How do I label you? You know what I'm saying? Like just trying to get information to help us organize and categorize like where the person fits in the scheme of society and culture. I definitely observe that in my own behavior in the past, and in other people's behavior. And I wonder if we could think about like how or why that is important, and is it really important, right? Interesting.
Yeah, I think Fromm's going to go more into that. I think that's why he's kind of contrasting the individual versus, like we started, versus the herd versus the conformity, because I think both of those are, he's digging into that, and we're going to go deeper into that as we continue to talk about him. But I identify with everything he's saying. I mean, he also does. This is one part that I thought was really good, where in a previous chapter we talked about it. He talks about a play where the author of the play says, "I am as you desire me." I think we might have talked about that when we were talking about the narcissism.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge one too.
Yeah, he says, "Inasmuch as I am not different, inasmuch as I am like the others and recognized by them as a regular fellow, I can sense myself as I am as you desire me." So it's like it's a form of creating a herd identity. The identity in that case rests on the unquestionable belonging to the crowd. And so, yeah, I mean, that's so interesting, and how that links to us losing our real authenticity. I think that's a very good point. Remember, Melissa Bernstein was talking about how we live in inauthenticity, and we also live outside of our own authenticity so much. And that's where a lot of anxiety comes from. And so I think there's a real link to that here, being what everybody else wants us to be, or what we think everybody else wants us to be.
Right. And then I'm sure that's driven by the need to feel safe and to not go insane, like Fromm is saying.
Yeah.
But there's a price to pay for that too, as you're saying, with the inauthenticity. But yeah, I think, he really drives home the fact where he says, what could be more obvious than the fact that people are willing to risk their lives, to give up their love, to surrender their freedom, to sacrifice their own thoughts. That's a big one.
Yeah, for the sake, and that happens a lot more than people might realize. We do that.
Yeah. Go ahead, for the sake of being one of the herd, of conforming, and thus of acquiring a sense of identity, even though it is an illusory one.
Man, I love
that's pretty good.
God, I love this man. Why is he? Okay, I'm gonna be quiet. No, that's so good, and I think that the contrast he's presenting here is: are we finding our identity in the herd, or are we finding our identity within ourselves? And I think what I'm hearing him say here is, if we don't find it within ourselves as an individual, we're going to look to the herd to find it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We are.
Yeah. So interesting and so good. And that herd sense of identity, he's saying, is an illusion. An illusory one. It's an illusion.
It's an illusion.
And that's, again, why there's that disconnect and the level of anxiety that so many people feel,
Yeah, I think it's pervasive. I think that is, I think when we talked, I don't know if it's Melissa Bernstein or which person we interviewed, but the fact that a lot of people are living with this low-level anxiety or depression says a lot.
Yes, it does. And actually, that was one of the articles I sent to you this week, Sonya, that I thought we might discuss. And we can at another time in more detail if we want. But there's a New York Times article about 8-year-olds now. 8 and 9-year-olds. I read a little bit of it this morning, committing suicide. And this is like the new, where we're seeing it now, not just teenagers, but like not even 10-year-olds. That is heartbreaking. And then in the article, it says that they ask, where did you get this idea? Do you know where they said? Social media.
Media. I was gonna guess that, but
I mean, it's a good guess, but it's scary. And again, this is the difference between someone like you and I who did not grow up with social media, and these kids who are growing up with the technology now, and the connection and the bullying that they would typically experience in person is now happening hyper. It's hyper now because it's online too. And so it follows them everywhere they go, when they're home, with looking on their devices. And so another shout out to Sherry Turkle's book, Reclaiming Conversation, right here, because if you have kids, please, I think it's a great read for you. Just, to get an understanding of like how this technology is impacting growth and development for kids. It's such a big deal. So
it's huge.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Well, we are going to cut it a little short today just because Sonya and I have both been crazy, but we wanted to connect with you guys and share this little section. Obviously, I'm at the beach, and so we're committed to you guys, but also I'm also with my family, so I want to spend some time with them.
On vacation.
Yeah, I'm on vacation. So yay! But we hope you guys are awesome. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for being with us. We're not going anywhere, even though we missed a week here. It's holiday stuff, but we will see you guys soon, and we appreciate you joining us on the Rethinking Humanity podcast.
Bye, guys.
Bye.